Yeah, thank you all for keeping here with us. It's a big part of the conversation. I just had a couple things to add to that. Is that a lot of what we're doing here, specifically with the fire safe councils, is a big picture idea. It starts with Firewise, which is right at your own houses, what you can do to keep them from igniting. But the Fire Safe Council vision is a landscape vision that we're trying to enact over this whole area. So it's going to take time. It's big projects. Those projects, if successful, if we as a community organize successfully, can change the landscape. That's what we're trying to do. And part of that movement is, I think, as we're all becoming aware, addressing this insurance component to that. We're going to need to keep learning about it, and we're going to need to keep pushing ourselves as an organized community that hopefully gets ahead of that in the future. Something we've recently looked into is United Policyholders. They're offering to do a webinar series for us. If people are interested, we can start to collect some names who would be interested. And it's just that's basically a nonprofit organization in the Bay Area that it's a consumer advocacy group. And so education, nothing's going to solve it this year, but we got to start where we can. But next up, we do have Ryan Derby from the Office of Emergency Services. He has come to give a presentation on what we can do at the next step. Now what we're talking about is the situation of an actual emergency and how we can be prepared to help emergency response and keep ourselves as safe as possible in that process. Let's give it up for Ryan Derby for coming down on a Saturday.
Again, my name is Ryan Derby. I'm the emergency manager for the Humboldt County Office of Emergency Services. Bear with me for one moment here while I figure out how to get this going. Okay. So real quick, by show of hands, who has heard of Zonehaven before? Okay. Keep your hand up if you know what zone you live in. Oh, man. All right, well, we're going to learn a little bit today. By a show of another hands, who's heard of Humboldt Alert before? And how many of you that have heard of it are actually registered and have maintained your contact information? All right, so about half of you, that's pretty good. So today, really what I want to talk about is a couple of the systems and programs that the Office of Emergency Services, or OES is what I'm going to refer to it as, what we do in preparation for wildfire season. And to start off, I want to say I absolutely hate the term fire season because it's now a year-round problem. And the benefit of the organizations, the agencies, the groups that are in this room is that you look at fire season as a year-long problem and you're preparing well in advance. We shouldn't start thinking about fires as we move into April or May or June. We should be preparing in January, because fire season historically in California was just the summer months, right? And now it's really starting late spring, going through late winter, right? So we've only got a couple months really to start thinking and pre-planning and improving our process for the next big bout of fires. So today, I'm going to go through what Zonehaven is, kind of the process of how that was developed over the course of a couple of years, where you can find the information and what it does to help elicit a better response. We're going to talk a little bit about personal and family preparedness planning, our restricted area access pass program, and then lastly, Humboldt Alert. So Zonehaven was really an idea born out of the August complex for us. Many of you were probably adversely impacted by the August complex in 2020. And one of the challenges with that incident, it was my first fire working for Humboldt County, and we were basically hand drawing our evacuation zones in tandem with U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE, and drawing it on a map with a Sharpie, and then creating a polygon and putting that into our emergency alert system. And from the time we received initial notification to when that actually went out to the impacted public, it would take upwards of an hour. And now with Zonehaven, we have 324 unique evacuation zones throughout the county, and we can drag and drop those evacuation shapefiles into our alerting system and notify you within just a matter of minutes. So we got funding secured back in June of 2021. The board allocated funding for a 3-year period, which we are now in year 2 of. Kicked off the project in September of 2021. And what that looked like was we essentially created a team from throughout the county to look at some pre-designated zones that the Zonehaven team had created for us, and then we refined those zones based on fire district input, law enforcement input, Cal OES, and local OES input. Launched those zones in December of 2021, and then we really got to put it to use last year during the Six Rivers Lightning Complex. And we also used it again in the earlier winter storms in January of this year to show some potential flooding. And kind of what this system does, how many of you lived in Garberville in 2020 during the August complex? Were any of you, having evacuation orders or warnings kind of creep onto your back door or monitoring that event really closely? And the mapping was awful, right? So we used, at that time we were using Google Maps, which is awful. We were having to hand draw those shape files, put them into Google, and then there's all these issues with those zones matching up with Trinity County and Mendocino County, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And it took a long time for those maps to be made public because they were being hand drawn. So now with Zonehaven, we have this interactive mapping product where when we issue an evacuation order or warning, we can change the color of your zone in real time. So you go to community.zonehaven.com and you can see the current status of your zone, whether it's normal, which they all should be right now unless something happened in the last hour or two that I'm unaware of, or it'll turn yellow for a warning, red for an order. And it also allows you to kind of check in on some preparedness stuff, either register for alerts or find out who your primary and secondary fire districts are. As I mentioned, it allows us to expedite our emergency notifications, turning that hour-long process into a 2 to 5 minute process. And it lets us kind of promote preparedness year-round, because if you use that site, it's going to link to our emergencies page where you can find updates on everything that's going on with Humboldt County emergencies. There's preparedness tools like many of the things that you'll see on the table, preparedness plans and evacuation checklists that you can get to. And then it allows for us to do some simulations and training, which we'll get into in a little bit. This is a picture of me and our GIS specialist during the August complex, drawing our evacuation zones in our GIS platform. It's not quite a map in Sharpie, it's an interactive board, but what this image is supposed to be showing is kind of that process of, hey, we got a call from the incident management team, whether it's CAL FIRE, US Forest Service, it was joint in that incident. And then we have to be able to articulate what the north, south, east, and west boundaries of the zone are. So we're drawing that in, we're trying to figure out what reference points to message out to the community, and it took a really long time. So after that incident, we started talking with Zonehaven and kind of getting an idea of what that product would do for us and how it could expedite these things. And these days of poring over maps are pretty much over. I mean, we still do it for our evacuation planning meetings when we're trying to de-escalate an evacuation order from an order to a warning, but we now have these kind of pre-canned zones that we can just activate in real time. So I'm hoping to not be able to do that again. For the simulations and training, what's really useful for us is when it's not an incident during what we call clear skies, we can basically drop a pinpoint on a map and plug in predicted weather patterns. And it's a little hard to see on here, but there's different color coding on here. So you'll have kind of yellow, light orange, and dark orange. And what that is a 1 to 5 hour time lapse. So it allows us to kind of pre-stage evacuation orders or warnings based on either current weather predictions in an active fire or we can drill it out when it's not an active incident and kind of see how we would progress our evacuation orders and warnings. To hopefully avoid these situations where we're clogging up one roadway, we can stagger those evacuations. And this is just another example of that in East County on the Willow Creek area. We've done this a couple times with tabletops internally, and for us it's really useful to kind of understand how our incident notification flow goes from the point of a fire to, when do we tell this zone to evacuate versus that zone to go into a warning. This is kind of a convoluted picture because we have two fires plotted on there, but still a really useful tool for us, and it's been a really useful tool for our fire partners as well. So there's three things that I really want you to take away today. It's how to access Zonehaven, and this is the website. It's community.zonehaven.com. If you go to that site, you can punch in your address and it will tell you what zone you are in. And over on that table, there's some magnets. So once you find out your zone, you write your zone in on a Sharpie, stick it on your fridge, and it's always there for you to remember. And that's just a picture of where you type in your address. Type in your address here. So the format of Zonehaven has changed a little bit since I created this slideshow, but all the information is going to be the same. In here you can see what your zone name is going to be. For all unincorporated county, it's going to start with HUM for Humboldt, and then it's going to have this numeric identifier. Does anyone know what zone we're in right now today? I know someone over here does. 221. Yep. What's right across the road? Let's go that way. 222. Okay. But basically what we do when we activate these zones or turn them from normal to an order or warning, we're going to put the reason. So it's going to be wildfire encroaching on this zone from this direction, or it could be a flood, or it could be anything else. We use this not just for wildfires, but for all incidents where evacuations could be elicited. The summary is going to be just kind of a brief portion of this descriptions. I'm going to kind of empower all of you to tell me or if your description for your zone is bogus, right? So when you go to community.zonehaven.com and you look at that description and it doesn't make sense or the reference point don't make sense for your community, email my office, call my office, let me know, and we'll change it so it makes sense for the people that actually live there, because we want those descriptions to be useful when we're sending out evacuation notices. And also in here, you're going to have links to our Office of Emergency Services resource page where you can find all the current emergency information, all of the preparedness materials that we have, register for county alerts. We've also got a quick button up in the top right corner there that says subscribe to alerts, and that'll allow you to receive either phone calls, texts, or emails from our office when we're notifying you. And this is just going back to what I said earlier. It's going to list out what your primary, secondary fire service agencies are. It'll toggle over to the law enforcement agency as well. And what's really interesting about this platform, it's not shown on this slide. Right now, because all the zones in the county are what's called normal status, there's nothing really populated in there. But when we do change the status of that zone, we can put a pin drop for where shelter location is going to be, point of distribution, a temporary evacuation site. Any roadblocks or hazard areas will be populating that map in real time, so you can see what places to avoid and what places to go to for help. There's also this section where you can get some basic details about the status of active fires, the acreage, percentage contained. There's a lot of really good resources out there that give more detail than this, but if you're looking for kind of your one-stop shop of where to get preparedness information, where to find out about your zone, and where to find out some basic information about a fire, Zonehaven is really good for that. The only thing I really want to point out on this slide is the coloration. So evacuation orders we always use for red. Red means dead, right? And we want to try to avoid that. Evacuation warnings are always going to be yellow. We change it to green for repopulate. Humboldt County does not use advisory notifications, so you really only need to worry about evacuation orders and warnings. We found that advisories are just kind of an added layer that's unnecessary. We're not going to be notifying you unless there's an immediate or potential threat to life safety. And then the shelter in place we really only use for law enforcement call-outs, whether that's EOD or SWAT. So again, back to the mapping. One thing that we've been advocating for the last couple of years is having Zonehaven turned into an app. It's not quite there yet. It's still a web-based platform, but anywhere that you have cell coverage or internet service, you can access these predefined zones and pull up those key pieces of information. We got some duplicate slides in here. So Zonehaven is split out into two distinct platforms. The Zonehaven Aware portion is the one that residents can access for emergency information. And then what my office uses is called Zonehaven Evac. And that's where we're pre-populating all the information for the zone. We put in, population detail based on census tract information. And that's really useful for us when we start thinking about repopulation. So we'll get a summary of a zone, what the daytime and nighttime population is, summary of vehicles in that area, and then the total acreage. And what that does, if I can get to it, that'll be on the next slide. What that does is it pre-populates into an evacuation pre-plan that we can distribute out to incoming incident management teams, or out-of-area law enforcement, people that don't know the area as well as our local responders do. It'll give them some key information on total population, critical evacuation facilities, critical infrastructure, any resources that are available in there, like where our staging areas are, or where a point of distribution is, or when we talk about critical evacuation facilities, that's going to be convalescent homes, schools, places where people may need additional support to get out and where there's a concentrated population. And this is just showing the different fields of what those pre-plans look like. We've used these, I want to say 3 times in the last 2 years. We had deputies go out to Siskiyou, out to Trinity, and then in Willow Creek during the Six Rivers complex. We printed out 150-page packages with all the zones that were impacted by that, and we're able to hand those out to the IMTs and to our staff as well. And what this really does, in addition to allowing those out-of-area responders better understand the community, it creates that common operating picture. So if you've got, law enforcement that's only focused on one roadblock, they also know where the other checkpoints are, and they can kind of keep tabs on what's going on with the incident as a whole. Any questions on Zonehaven before we dive into family preparedness? Yes?
So in most emergency situations, we often lose cell phone towers. So Zonehaven, it's really a resource to go look at. The alerts are what are pushed to us based on the information that's coming through the incident and what through Zonehaven. Is that correct? And so how do we plan for the low bandwidth situation?
We'll get to that. So, sorry, Yana. So the alerts in Zonehaven are totally separate systems. The only real integration with Zonehaven and our Humboldt Alert, which is kind of our local branding of Everbridge platform, is the shapefiles. So we take those shapefiles from Zonehaven, drop them into Humboldt Alert, and then we can still elicit the notifications that way, or through door-to-door, or
So does Zonehaven issue alerts?
it does not.
It does not. So
No.
you're using the alert system to give us information, and then we can check for understanding on Zonehaven.
Correct. So any of you, who's received a Humboldt Alert before? Right? Not a whole lot of information in those. It's going to tell you what the issue is and what to do. Right? It's going to say, there's a fire, evacuate to this place. And then if you want more information, we can include a link to Zonehaven where you can get the updated maps. You can gather information as to where the incident is, or it's more an augmenting tool than the actual alerting system. So no one's going to receive alerts out of Zonehaven, but they can use that to better understand the alerts that they receive. Any other questions on it? Okay, so before you all go to bed tonight, I need you to go to that website, find out your zone, grab a magnet and write it on there and put it on your fridge. Easy. All of my stuff that I'm presenting is free. That's the difference between the ones that we've talked about today. There's a QR code too. I didn't know how to use QR codes until about a year ago, and I've been told that they are not a good PR tool, but I think they're becoming more commonplace. So if you know how to use a QR code, it's going to take you right to your, right to the website, and if you have location turned on your phone, it'll take you right to your zone too. How many of you have kids in the room? And you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. How many of you talk about emergency preparedness and planning with your children? What's a good age to start that at? Yeah, whenever they can sit still enough to do it, right? So on that table over there, there's a bunch of paper that looks just like this, and it's essentially your family preparedness or your personal preparedness plan. And there's many different versions out there, but they're all kind of getting at the same thing. You need to think about where you're going to go for information, where you're going to evacuate to, what critical things in your household you need if you evacuate, whether that's medication or snacks or food for your dog or extra pair of clothes or some water. This is going to really spell that out for you. And there's also insurance information and medical information that you can put in there. Because when an emergency happens, we all kind of instinctively go to this fifth grade mentality. There's too much going on, you've got too many things to think about, and if you have it written down somewhere, it's going to be easy to remember those things and easier for you to be prepared and save your own life. Because when we talk about what the role of the Office of Emergency Services is, we're not looking necessarily at doing individual response. We're very much looking at the macro level. And even with Zonehaven, we don't drill into the neighborhood level of evacuation planning. That's on you to figure out. When we talk about evacuation planning, some of our zones are 150,000 acres large, right? So we're talking about evacuations from, but it's a really, really important one. And then Humboldt Alert. So it seemed like most of you have registered for this previously. If you haven't, I really encourage you to, especially as we're moving into the summer months. This is how we notify you when there is an evacuation. We don't use it for general public safety stuff like road closures or non-life-threatening things. We're only going to notify you if there's a life safety risk. It can take as little as 2 minutes to register, and if you don't want to do it, you can call my office and we'll do it for you. When you go onto the website, humboldtgov.org/alerts, it's going to look like a really long application, but you really only have to fill in your name, your address, and your preferred method of contact. So it can take you 2 minutes or it can take you 20 minutes, depending on how much you want to dive into it. But really, really important. We have learned in the last year or two that our notifications have come through as potential spam on a lot of people's cell phones. So your other piece of homework today, in addition to finding out your zone, registering for Humboldt Alert, actually I guess I have 4 pieces for you to do. Fill out the family plan, register for Humboldt Alert, find your zone, and then save these 2 phone numbers in your phone. We've been trying for 2 years to get our number registered, and it just has not been working. But if you save 441-5000 and 268-2500 in your phone as OES, that way when those calls or those texts come through, it's not going to get blocked as spam, and you'll make sure that you get notified, assuming you have cell coverage. And if you don't, we issue our evacuation notices through high-low sirens, door-to-door knocks, or community patrols. There's a number of ways that we can do that. And I'll leave that up for a minute. Yeah. So there were 2 ways that came through. The state of California now has what's called the early earthquake warning or alerting platform or something like that. So anything that registers above a 4.5, the state automatically triggers a notification. And for us, we issued our notification, I want to say an hour or 2 after the earthquake happened. So that early earthquake notification is going to be almost immediate. Like when the when the shaking's happening. We don't have early earthquake detection equipment in our shop, so we're getting notified of that earthquake when it's shaking, just like you are, and then we issue our notifications once we get to the Emergency Operations Center. So 2 separate systems. That early earthquake one, a lot of times is going to come pre-installed on your phone if it's Android. If it's an iPhone, I believe you have to download an app called MyShake. But that one's really useful as well. It'll give you similar alerts. Yeah.
So Mendocino uses a different alert system than Humboldt. Can you talk about like how those systems compare and why we're kind of in different platforms in different counties?
Yeah, so Mendocino is also using Everbridge, but they use a separate alerting system within Everbridge called Nixle. And what Nixle is basically you can text, I think it's 8989, and then you can register that way. It's just like a 2-step process. Every county in the state essentially is on their own right now for purchasing their own alerting platform. So the best we can really do is making sure that our messaging is aligned. The state's tried to do some state-sponsored alerting systems that Cal OES pays for, but I probably shouldn't say this in a broad room, but anything that's government goes to the lowest bidder, right? And a lot of counties have opted out of using that statewide system because it's just not adequate for what larger jurisdictions or larger counties need for the throttling of how many SMS messages go out. So there's no good solution, and similar with Zonehaven, not every county's on that either. So if you look at the map today, you'll see that Humboldt County is kind of an island with all these zones put into it, and then there's none inputted for Del Norte, Trinity, or Remendo, because they're all using Google or some other GIS platform. So it gets challenging for that integration on a regional level, but it's really useful for us to be able to open Zonehaven with a fire team and say, we're going to activate zone 222, 221. It just gets really challenging on those border communities, but we're working through it a little bit. And then lastly, just our contact information. Our generic email, oes@co.humboldt.ca.us. If you ever have questions or if you need resources for community events like this, we have lots of good handouts and lots of good swag, like the pens on the table and magnets. You can always reach out to us, or if you want a presentation about something we're working on or something that's a pressing issue for your community, we're happy to talk with you about that. And then our website is going to have a lot of good key information for you as well. Any questions? I either bored you all to sleep or did it.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan Derby from the Office of Emergency Service. Thank you all for listening to all the presentations and being here and being present. So at this point in the event, we are basically going to kind of break out into, resource fair, kind of a mingling type of situation where you have the opportunity to